Hi everyone, Titus here for part 4 of our Teleportation Pad mini-series, and in this video, we'll be sculpting our primary, secondary, and tertiary details into our accent pieces. When it comes to sculpting, Blender gives you a large assortment of brushes, but you can actually make your own custom brush using alpha textures imported from the web or created from imaging editing software such as Photoshop. Let's not waste any more time, and we'll jump right into it. Alright. So we got our model here. We're going to be working on the high poly for now, so you can collapse the low poly and hide it. For the accent pieces, that's going to be these metal pieces here. So we'll make sure it's highlighted, and then you can go into the sculpting phase, or the sculpting tab, I should say. Now, if you're joining like fresh and you haven't seen the other videos, if you're going to try to sculpt, your object needs to have, a lot of geo. So if I tab in here, you can see that, this is a very dense mesh. Therefore, if I tab out and I select a brush, I can draw pretty easily on it. And that's kind of like what you're looking for. If I were to go back to my layout and hide the high poly and bring back the low poly, and I select that same accent piece and I try to go to sculpting, you're going to notice there's a lot less geo. So if I were to try to sculpt, you can see nothing's really happening. And that's just because there's just not enough geo in this mesh to do anything with. So go back here, hide low poly, bring back the high, select our accent, and back into sculpting. And make sure I'm in the right one there. All right. So just a quick demonstration of the brushes. You can drag out here and expand them out so you get an easier view of them. And just a quick view. So your brushes are on the left here. At the top, you have your diameter of your brush size, basically. And then you also have the strength meter. These two little icons here are pen pressure sensitivity. So I use a pen tablet myself, but I don't particularly like these. I prefer manually setting my strength and my size. And then a quick shortcut too is you can press F on your keyboard and then actually expand out whatever brush size you're looking for, kind of like that. And I just remembered, let me add screencast keys. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so if you press F, you can resize your brush that way. You can also just resize it over here, whatever's easier for you. And then of course your strength, you can set at the top as well. Oops, tab back over here and set that back to 0.5. The plus sign and the minus sign are important. When you're sculpting, like if I choose this brush here, you'll notice if I zoom in, you can add detail. If you hit the minus sign, you can actually subtract detail. And we'll Control Z to undo that. Another thing too, sometimes it's helpful if you don't want to affect the back faces, you can go into a brush's settings, and there's a setting for front faces only. So when you actually brush, it doesn't affect the stuff in the back. That is very helpful when we start doing alpha brush textures, which I'll show you in a bit. And I think that's kind of most of the basics. The other thing I'd call out is you do have mirror options here. So if you were doing doing a detail on the object that needed to be mirrored to the other side, you can choose an axis. So like if I chose the x-axis here, you can see it does it on both sides automatically. And then you can go across any axis you need, so X, Y, or Z. And it's easy to enable and disable when you're going through. In terms of brushes, the ones I use the most, I would say, of course, the draw brush. I use the draw sharp, which is this one here. And that's just for adding, usually when I do like scratch marks or stuff like that. By the way, each brush tends to have its own settings. You may have to turn settings off for each brush. You can actually adjust that, I forget where, somewhere in the preferences, you can have it where these settings will apply to every single brush, but some people prefer to have different settings depending on the brush type, so it might be useful to leave it on. So I use these two. I use the clay strips a lot, and that one's pretty kind of self-explanatory, just strips of clay. And then I sometimes use blob or inflate, not as much. I use the the crease? Yeah, the crease brush I use a lot for the extra detail. And then I do like the scrape brush there as well. And then the grab brush is probably one of the ones I use the most. It's got a quick key just with G. And then of course you can move a shape around just using that pretty easily. The deform I don't use as much because it can move an entire mesh kind of like that. I tend to go for the snake hook, which will add geometry as it pulls out, and that can be a little bit more helpful in a lot of situations I've noticed. So I'll use the snake deform more than I will use the elastic deform. And a lot of the other brushes I don't really use. But you know, it depends on, I guess, the project or what you're working on, so you may find uses for them. I don't do a whole heck of a lot of sculpting. And then sculpting in general is, you know, even though this is kind of like a beginner thing, it's difficult. You know, it may take you a few tries to get something you like, but I'll say, you know, if you just keep practicing, you'll eventually, you know, end up with a model that you're happy with. So don't feel discouraged if you don't get it the first time around. Sometimes it takes 2, 3, maybe 6 passes before you get something that is acceptable for you. So the other thing that can be helpful is masking, which is basically you can go into a shape. Let's say I typically will do a strength of 1, so full strength on a mask, and then you can basically color an area like so, and that's kind of like masked out. So now if you were to, like, say I do this and I switch my stroke to an anchor and I'll do full strength, if I was to kind of bend out like that, you'll notice it doesn't affect the masked areas. Or if you masked out an area and you added detail and then you wanted to invert it, you can actually go to mask, invert the mask, and now suddenly when you're doing your shape or whatever you're adding, you can add the detail into the other area, just like that. Alright, but I am actually going to undo the mask because I don't really need that. So I think for this tutorial, I'll try to demonstrate a different technique on each piece. So my model's probably going to look a little funky, but that's okay. So I think for the first piece, I will try my best to do just vanilla sculpting. And then for the other ones, we'll do some alpha textures, just to show, you know, the different styles and what the results can be. So, so things starting off, I'm going to go into my grab brush with G, and then I'll resize. And I think what I'm going to do is these rivets, I'm actually going to bring them lower. And remember, they're all one object, so I'll just like, actually, what I want to do is, since we're doing this, let's bring out the low poly as well. I'll hide the accent and the base. And I'm going to select both sets of rivets. And the reason we want to do that is because we want our low poly and our high poly objects to occupy the same space. Otherwise, we're going to have problems. Alright, and then I'm going to grab it in the Z axis, and I'm really going to dig it into the mesh. So kind of right about there, kind of like the rivet was pushed down. And then I am okay with that, so I will hide the low poly. I will select just the high poly, go back into sculpting. Actually, no, whoops. I'm going to select the accent pieces and then go back into sculpting. And now what I can do is press F to resize my brush a bit. I'm going to try it there for now, and I'm just going to push down. And I'm just kind of tapping around, you know, not too much. I get something like that, and then I'm just going to repeat on the other side here. And then I'm just slowly going around just to deform like the metal, like it was pushed down. So kind of like that. If you go too far, you can hold shift, and then you can actually bring back some of that details and kind of basically bring the mesh up, because it evens the topology. So it'll bring the mesh basically back up if you go too far. So your shift key, and that works for any brush, by the way. So I can be in like the scrape brush. If I hold shift, it'll smooth out basically rather than scrape. So that's probably another brush that's really handy, is the smooth brush, but you can do it from any brush. So it's kind of like, you'll probably just be doing it from some other brush, but yeah, just hold shift. All right, so then we go back and we look at the result. We go top view, and you can kind of see the difference that I was going for. So this one looks a little bit pushed down, like rivets are pushing on the metal, versus this look up here, which is kind of flat. So nothing too fancy, but that's a good starting point. And then I'm basically just going to repeat that for the remaining rivets. So I'll speed up the workflow, and I'll see you in a bit. All right, we are back now. So we got basically a simple shape kind of like that, just a little bit of extra detail. And a lot of times for stuff like this, it's the human element that really makes it pop. So the fact that it's non-uniform and it looks different on each one, you know, kind of makes it stand out a little bit. But I guess it depends on the object you're trying to create too. So let's go back into sculpting. All right, so the next thing I like to do, I guess one quick call out too is you may notice some weird artifacting around the edges. You especially see it right around on the inside of the base right here. A lot of that is our remesh. Our remesh just wasn't a high enough value, or we had weird geometry going on. A lot of times to fix it, you can just go to a higher remesh value, but I think what I'm gonna try to do is I'm just gonna hold shift and smooth it out. So you see, you might notice a little bit of weirdness like right here. You just hold shift, it'll clear a lot of it up. So don't feel too bad about that. And you know, if your computer can handle a higher remesh, go for it. If not, then just smooth it out and you'll usually be all right. Okay. The other thing I like to do is I like to go to my scrape tool, and then I will typically, let's get rid of pressure sensitivity there. And we could start with a 0.7. I usually like to be around a 0.4, but I can zoom in here, make my brush relatively small, and I can just kind of scrape away these edges just a bit to add some wear and tear. Unfortunately, I can't really do a mirror on this because it's not a mirrorable object. Well, my pivot point is different, I guess, so I won't be able to do it. That's All right, and if you run into a point that's weird, you can hold shift and that'll clear it up, and then you can go back over it with your scrape brush and just add that little bit of extra detail. All right, just like that. I went a little bit too far on that one, so I can hold shift and then I can just kind of smooth it back. If I can't bring it back, you can also Control Z and just undo it right before you kind of get into it. So a lot of this is just going to be patience and temperance. Make sure to, before we do this sculpting, if you do have to save it under a new file format, unless you are backing up different versions of your model through different collections. That way, in case something goes wrong, you don't like the way it looks, you can easily revert back to a copy that isn't sculpted. And then I can also do similar things here. Oops. And just scrape away this inside here. One thing you can do too is if you're looking for a straight line, we can go to our stroke and set it to a line. And then you can actually drag across where you want it, let go, and it'll get you kind of what you're looking for. Maybe like that. Then we set it back to space. And then I can hit these other sides. Like so. And it's not much. And if we go back to the layout here, it will catch the light differently. So you see these are very harsh edges versus this one. It's definitely looks a little bit more wear and tear because it's non-uniform too. So, and then the next thing we can do is we can add some scrapes. So we can come to our draw sharp brush. I'm going to come to top view. I'm going to make my brush real small. Maybe do, how does that look? Maybe 2. Maybe I'm going to try 7. Yeah, something like that. And then we can kind of just come through and then just do sharp little cuts kind of here and there. And just giving it a little bit of extra detail. And you come to front view, which on this one you won't be able to actually make sure I'm on the right one. Yeah, I am. Okay. All right, so we'll have to kind of line up here because it's not really perfectly center. That was a bit too much. So I can try doing a 0.4. And then with some of these scrapes, you can come back with the crease tool, and then you can make your brush a little bit bigger than where the crease was initially, and you just go over your cuts, and it'll actually push them into the mesh a little bit better, and it'll catch the light. So it gets a little bit better. And then any details that you go too much, we'll just go back to our grab brush, and then you can just kind of shift, and it'll kind of smooth some of it and wash it out. So you can have some that are more pronounced and some that are washed out, especially if the detail didn't come, you know, quite right like that one. You can wash it out. Go there, so it's a little less pronounced. And then what you can do too is we'll go back to our claw strips, our clay strips. I always call it claw because it looks like a claw. And then switch it to subtract. And then I usually make my brush pretty small for this one too. but you can, oh, that's way too big. Actually, I think what we'll do is we'll zoom in a bit more. There we go. Oh, I know what's going on. My strength is too much. And I think my brush settings are wrong. So 0.5. Tiled. I am anchored, that's why. So let's do space. Yeah, there we go. I think your defaults will be alright. I must have changed that earlier. And then you can come around just the, like some corners. And then you just hold shift to bring some of it back out. I think that's a bit too big, so I'm going to make that smaller. Kind of like that, and then I'll hold shift. And I'm just going to smooth some of it out so it blends in a bit, so it just looks like a blemish. And then shift, smooth some of it out. And then another detail. Maybe do another one over here. And that one I might not actually smooth out, so it kind of stands on its own a bit. And then of course too, we can go back to our grab brush, and then any parts that you see that are like damaged, you can push them in maybe, and then kind of smooth it around like that. Just little things, little dents. All right, so we got some primary, secondary, tertiary details in that one. And then if we go up here, you can kind of see, you know, just a little bit here or there. And I find the smaller the details, the better. So if you don't, like, I think this one's probably a little bit too much, but it's more demonstrating the effect. But you can go pretty far with it. I mean, it takes some practice. We didn't use too many brushes, and it's a pretty good result. And that's basically vanilla sculpting. So let me show you some of the alpha brushes. So we'll go back to sculpting here. We'll pick a different element. And this time, I'm going to come to this one. And I'm going to select a brush I don't typically use. So for me, that's just the regular clay one. I hardly ever use this one. You can come down here to your brush settings, and you can do open. And these are alpha textures. So you can make your own alpha textures if you have like Photoshop, or some other, if you're good with other imaging editing software. You could take pictures of real world objects or places and bring it into like Photoshop, and then you just bring out you basically monotone it out so it's like black and white, and then you bump up the contrast, so you make the whites whiter and the blacks darker. And then you can export that as like a alpha map into Blender. And a lot of these are actually Photoshop files, and just from that you can basically create a brush. Like an example here is this one right here. So you can select this one, open image, and then for alpha brushes, I do stencils, and I do area planes, and I do random for my texture. So we'll start with area plane. On the stroke, I'm going to change this to anchored, and then I'm going to turn pen pressure off, pen pressure for size off as well, and I believe I want subtraction. I want it to be a cut, because that kind of looks like a cut to me. And then you can actually just drag out, and you can get some of those cuts I was making earlier, but a lot better and easier using an alpha mask. Now you want to be careful. You can see this sort of situation right here where it's cut into this mesh, but it's raised up on this mesh. Typically you'll see that when you do this type of work. I would say check the front faces only, and that should fix most of those issues. If not, just kind of stay away from doing some of those cuts as well, because sometimes they don't come out right too, for one reason or another. But you can just place cuts around. And then another thing too you can do, like those are only half strength. A lot of times I'll bring the strength full on an anchor. Just because typically it's you're just letting the mask handle the you know, the depth information and stuff that you want. Do kind of like right there, and then I'm getting probably too many cuts here, but it's very easy to do with alpha mask, so you can get carried away very quickly. Alright, and then let's maybe try a different mask here. Let's try a dent. So this one's kind of a dented mesh here. I got photos, the actual photos on another screen, so it's a little bit easier for me to tell them apart based on, you know, this mask. But if I go over here, drag this out, that one, yeah, it's a little bit softer than I thought. Let's go ahead and instead of area plane, what you can do is random. And let's try this out. So what you can do is, if you drag out, you can affect the entire mesh. Depending on the texture you're using, it didn't work too good with that one. But you can add like some pretty cool like rocky textures that way. That one's there. And then you can overlay a lot of these too to actually get the effect that you're going for. So that one seems a little washed out. It's not coming out too good. Let me see. Let's try. No, I still want to stick with random. Let's not do front faces with this one. No, that's not the reason it's not going. Oh, you know what? I bet you. Let's go back. Front faces only. Let's increase the size of the brush. Ah, there you go. So sometimes just because they're alpha brushes, I guess, you want to sometimes increase the actual size of the brush, and it'll dig in more for you. If you're going for something like that. And then maybe we can dent over here a bit. I think you gotta be careful with the edges though. And that one is a bit too strong. I think I will zoom in more. Bring my brush smaller. Yeah, there you go. Kind of like that. And then of course you can hold shift. So I'll just press G and then shift, and you can reduce some of the details along the edges so it's not as pronounced. Blend it in a little bit, kind of like that. And that's kind of like a good way to do dents and stuff. Let's see, another alpha mask I have is the this one here. I'll show you. We'll do open, and it looks like it's going to be 18. 17. And this is kind of like the rocky texture. If we undo that and do plus, you can see it goes the other way. And sometimes that could be something you're looking for. So if you're looking at like a rock texture, you can just come like top view and then pick an area and then just scale it up. And then depending on like what you're going for, you can get that sort of look, you know. And it doesn't completely erode all your other details either, so sometimes it can kind of work. But I think for me, that's too big. So I am gonna do something over here. And then I think I'm gonna do something over here. Kind of like that. I think that's gonna be the look I do for this one. So nothing too crazy, but just a little bit of extra detail. And then you can, of course, mix. So like we can go back to our other brushes and kind of do what we were doing before, where you're holding shift, you're smoothing some of these rough parts out, and then you come behind and then just scraping, just adding some extra interest to your model. And I like that. Just get a little bit more area for the light to bounce off of and grab. And then we'll be able to bake all these details onto our texture maps and put it onto our low poly model so we can actually see them in Unreal Engine. And then if we want to do something similar, we can do line stroke, something there, make that different. Line stroke this one here. Maybe don't have it be uniform. We can do our clay strips. We can dig in certain areas as well. And then you're just mixing the best of both worlds. It's nice when your model, you're trying to do something that actually needs damage. Damage is really forgiving. You can mess damage up a lot because you're just damaging a model. So, you know, if you go too far or too much, sometimes it blends in and you can't really tell. All right, so that's what we're looking like so far. So I think for the last one, I'm going to show you the stencil method. So we'll go back into sculpting and just go over that real quick. I'm going to choose my same brush and I got to figure out what I want to stencil. I guess we'll stencil what we got. Yeah, let's go ahead and I'm going to choose subtraction though, so I'm going to go the other way with it. Stencil and then stroke. I like to change stroke to airbrush when I'm doing a stencil, just because it's a little bit easier. And then the way you do it is it brings up this little grid. This grid is basically your texture. You can right click and you can drag it into place wherever you want it. And then you can size your brush appropriately. And then you can kind of come in and pick a position you want. And then with an airbrush, I just tap. And then when you tap, it'll go based on your strength, right? So, and then when you move around, you kind of see basically that. So quite like that, so what you can do, come over here, size your brush bigger. Obviously that's too big. Size it down. And then you can basically create these interesting patterns around your mesh where you maybe have some damage. And I'm actually going to avoid the corners because the corners are a pain to bake. So I'll make that smaller and maybe go there instead. Maybe do that and then that there. Sometimes you go too much, which I think that is probably too much. It'll stand out. And then once you have that detail, we come in with our grab brush, and then we can kind of tone it down with the smooth option, and then just kind of blend it. You can see I did too much damage there. That came out. That'll be hard to bake, so we'll need to fix that up a bit. A lot of times when you do a stencil, if you're going, you know, something that's flat versus something that's 90-degree difference, you're going to get a lot of this weirdness here. So try to avoid that if you can. We got a lot of issues here, so let's see if the smooth tool will save the day. I'm actually going to try the scrape tool on that one there. That one's definitely going to look more damaged than usual. See, alpha brushes can be pretty powerful, but use with caution. All right, and then let's go back and let's maybe do some more cuts. Cuts should be pretty easy. Just tap along. You get these interesting shapes here. And then you don't have to use parts of the stencil either. Like you can pick and choose, which is kind of nice. Something there. All right, and I'll come in with the crease tool behind that. And what we can do is hold shift, smooth some of this out, and then let go, and then crease it in. So hold shift, smooth it out, and then crease it in. Kind of like that. Top B to make this one easier. Shift. There we go. And can I pinch that up? No, I can't. Grab this up. Alright, I guess that we'll probably have to do. Alright, let's go back in the layout, see how we did. Do Alt-A to deselect. And we can move around our model. This one looks a little funky, probably needs another pass, but I'll let you guys kind of choose, you know, pick your style and figure out what you want, you know, what you want to make it, whether you want to even do damage or you just want to add other accent details and stuff. Damage is certainly an easier thing to do because you're just basically beating the thing up, which is very easy to do in sculpting. But look at some other mat caps here. We got that one. You can get a funky looking one. And then this is just the accent pieces, so this will look a lot better once we do the base and the rivet. Well, the rivets you probably won't be able to see too much, but because they're real small. But yeah, figure out what color scheme we're gonna go with. That one looks really weird. But yeah, I think that's, we're going to be cutting it here, people. So in the next one, we'll begin sculpting the main base. And if we have time, we'll do the rivets. But yeah, once we do all the sculpting elements, we'll be able to move on to the UV unwrapping. And we do that so we can actually texture paint. So we do all this, and then we UV unwrap the low poly. And then we can actually add some color to our model. So we're almost there. But as always, thanks for watching. Consider subscribing, and see you on the next one.